My name is Jesse Holstein. I'm one of the resident musicians at Community MusicWorks, and I'm very happy to be joined by two of my very close friends who are involved in this year's Fred Kelley concert. So first, below me, I'm not sure the orientation on your screen, is the tenor Frank Kelley, no relation to Fred Kelley, but he will be singing the poignant and beautiful song cycle of Franz Schubert, schöne Müllerin, or The Lovely Maid of the Mill, on Sunday, May 22nd at 2 p.m. in Bell Street Chapel. We'll also be doing it in Amherst at the South Congregational Church on the 21st at 2 p.m. The other guest joining me today is one of my oldest friends. He's not old, we've just known each other a very long time. Jeff Louie, who made this fabulous arrangement transcription of the piano part and made it into a string quartet. Now, I will say right off the bat, this schöne Müllerin was one of those pieces that I love dearly, and I never thought I would get a chance to perform it because I don't play the piano and I don't sing in that way. I sing along with the radio station in the car. But due to the magic and power of Jeff Louie, I am granted one of my dreams and play at least some of the various keyboard parts of Die schöne Müllerin. So to get the ball rolling, how did this arrangement first come about?
Are you asking me?
Well, sure. I'll ask you, Frank.
I actually had the idea that since most of the piano writing was in at most 4 parts and carefully written in such that at any point 4 instruments could execute the piano part, I thought, maybe even this could be imagined as a string quartet, since these parts all seem to kind of lie where a string quartet would actually be able to play these things. And it's very odd that the voicing of almost, I don't know, Jeff, tell me what you think, but almost all the chords are voiced in 4 parts. Very few times. I mean, in the Winterreise, there are some much more complex chords that have 5, 6 notes in them sometimes. But this, it seems almost without exception in 4 parts. And so I thought, wow, this could be almost considered as a Schubertian sketch for something that could have been turned into a string quartet.
I do think that is characteristic of most of Schubert's work in general. I don't think, even if the chords are bigger, it's not necessarily that he's thinking in contrapuntally in more than 4 parts. They're just chords that get enriched by extra notes. So even when he does here or in other places go beyond 4 actual notes playing, it's not something that would have been hard to handle with the string quartet, especially having them play double stops or just picking out the correct voices to make it sound correct.
So I went to Lenny Machinsky, who is the former executive director of Apple Hill, and said, I would really love to have a string quartet arrangement of Die schöne Müllerin, and I think it would be a very, very interesting project. And Lenny came through.
And Jeff, what was your process of arranging and transcribing a piece of this magnitude? As a string player, you are a string player in addition to being a pianist. I do feel your parts, all your transcriptions always lie so well for strings. How long did it take you to do this, and what was your process?
So this took me a while, because it was really a collaboration between me and Frank. It wasn't just Frank throwing me the thing, say do this, and then me coming back to him. We really wanted to get something that was really suited, because I knew who was going to be performing. It was very helpful because I could get his take on everything. And so he gave me lots of ideas. He had more ideas than I would have ever come up with on my own. And said, what if you did this here? Because he knows the piece inside and out. So he had ideas for every single verse of every single song and wanted to do something different every time something came back. Normally, if I were writing something for someone I didn't know who was performing, I would try to stick as close as I could to the original score that I was transcribing, mostly because I don't want to force the performer into a situation where they're because of what's written on the page, they're making a musical choice that they might not want to. But in this case, because I knew the performer, he told me what his musical choices were beforehand.
Yeah.
So that let me go wild with getting away, much farther away from the score than I normally would, which was both liberating and a little more time consuming, but it was worth it. So there was a lot of back and forth between me and Frank, where I would mark up something from the song after we talked about it, send it to him, and he'd look at it, and I'd send him a bad computer spit out audio recording. He'd listen to it and come back and say, this is great. I have another idea. It might spark something in him, say, we should do this on this verse that he hadn't thought of. Or he would say, this is a little too much. You can pull this back here. Or he could say, you could go more here with whatever motif he was thinking about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because we've started rehearsing separately from Frank. And even in a lot of the strophic songs, even though the piano part might play the exact same music with a repeat, there's a lot of variance in the string writing from verse to verse. Even in the very first song, I mean, I'm playing the viola part, that bouncing, wandering theme that motive is played several different ways. And I was going to ask you, was that, you were just having fun, or was that was intentional, or, yeah?
It was intentional. It was, we really wanted to, it's the kind of thing, if I were playing the piano part, I would probably be playing things with slightly different articulation each time, trying to match what was going on textually, but without actually changing the notes. But here, because Frank's vision of what he wanted was clear enough, I had the freedom to change registers, change a little more than just articulations or things like that. I could actually change registers and make things thicker, make things thinner. And that was very liberating. And it was a new experience for me in arranging that is only possible when you have the actual performer working that closely with you.
Yes. The
And
glory of Frank.
And it would be something that I would ask of my piano collaborator, if I were doing this, would be to try and evoke the different colors of the different implements that were being described, for instance, in the first song. The idea of the water rushing through the mill, the idea of the wheels being activated by the water, the idea of the stones that the wheels turned being activated by the water, and finally the idea of wandering is completely different. So I think a talented collaborator would have all these pianistic articulations and various touches on a keyboard, even a forte piano in the time, or a modern piano now even more capable of evoking different colors for those 5 verses in the first song. And Jeff was so fantastic in going this way and making those colors that related to those various either thought processes or implements that were being described by Müller and Schubert.
Frank, how long have you been performing this work?
Well, I was really lucky to get to learn it when I was a graduate student at Cincinnati Conservatory. I decided that I would just make it it wasn't really one of my recitals, but it was just an outside project, and I had a collaborator that I really liked, a piano player that we got along really well, and I said, let's just do this as a project. And starting in graduate school, I was lucky enough to get to do it, I would say, at least once every 10 years. for a while now, I've been getting to do it at least once a year for the past 10 or 11 years or so. It's it's one of those lifelong love projects that if you learn it and get it internalized early on, it just grows with you and gets richer and richer, and you understand the textures and the meaning and the subtlety of the somewhat surfacey and apparent poetry, which is not at all surfacey and apparent. It's very deep, very textured, very layered. It's just kind of popular in nature, but not at all simple.
And how has your interpretation, I assume it's developed as you've gone deeper into the piece over all these
I would
years?
say very much so. Yeah, I think probably when I did it in graduate school, I was probably getting the notes and the words right. Yeah.
Hmm.
And now hope I'm getting a little bit deeper into the meaning of the poetry and into the meaning of um, this piece. Yeah.
Hmm. My first encounter with it was I was in school and college and the uh, I think song 17, is it De Böse Farbe?
Yeah.
The we had to um, analyze that, and it was the first time I realized like augmented second chords, and I was like, "Whoa, that's cool." But yeah, and so I picked up a recording. CDs were out, and I just remember like, yeah, that's where I first fell in love with the piece, and I never thinking I would get a chance to play it. And um, yeah, one of the things I love, and I never get tired of, is just the text painting that Schubert does. And obviously, the piano part does much of that text painting. I just, for those of you who are watching this and are unaware, maybe Jeff, could you explain what text painting is and how Schubert does this sort of thing?
Uh, how Schubert does it? Well, text painting, I think you mean just actually trying to create the images that the text is conveying musically. So if like Frank's saying, if there's water, there's a musical motif that is flowing like water in some way, so that that image comes through. How Schubert does this is, I think, like how any composer would try to do it, is get the images in your head and try to convey it musically in whatever way you can. Between a piano and a voice, it's just two instruments, so there's not a lot you can do, except the piano is such a versatile instrument that you can end up doing a lot of textures, a lot of you can get at a lot of images through the piano, as you know from later when you get to like Debussy and stuff. All kinds of imagery comes through. But in Schubert's time, he was still playing on a forte piano, and even with that, there's a lot that can come through in terms of the nature images, the color images.
For instance, in that song number 17 that you're talking about, the riding out of the hunting horns, pop, 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 yeah, that motif with like the parallel force and yeah, pop, 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 that kind of string writing in the middle of that song is amazing. And also the anger and fear of the inner turmoil of the person delivering this text at the beginning of that song is amazing from Schubert. It's not just coloristic text painting of specific words and specific instruments. It's inner turmoil text painting. It's that emotion that is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And Frank, can you speak a little bit about that dramatic arc? So there's 20 songs in this song cycle, and with the opening of sort of youthful joy and abandonment and joyful, just going out into the world, only to transition to a somewhat tortured and anxious experience, and then finally to unfortunately to tragedy. How important do you think it is to like almost method act the young Müller. Is it enough to sing? I mean, it's sort of a rhetorical question, but enough to sing beautifully and observe the poetry, or is it an added dimension to the delivery of the poetry in sort of a method acting sort of way?
Well, interesting question. And the way you put it is interesting too. I think Schubert actually wrote that this was meant to not necessarily be sung by a polished singer. It was meant to be sung kind of like an everyman kind of delivery. And so that gives me lots of cover. You don't have to sing beautifully. You just have to be expressive with the text and deliver Muller's words. It's not like a Pavarotti aria or anything like that. It's meant to be a delivery of the story. In fact, probably this, the milieu in which this was performed was most likely in a living room that was probably a fairly generous sized living room by today's standards, but nonetheless, it probably had a piano in it, some sofas, a couple chairs, invited over maybe 10, 12 people or maybe 18 people, and you sang it in that context, and you delivered the text, and it was an ensemble of, or not an ensemble, a gathering of poets, a gathering of musicians, a gathering of pseudo-intellectuals, not the intellectual class, not academicians or anything like that, but people who were thinking about art and things like that. And so it was a parlor kind of event. And so it is about the immediacy of the story, and yet it's also not a tragic Shakespearean delivery either. It's this was written in the Biedermeier period, and it's more about home and smallness and little paintings and these small, not small ideas intellectually, but contained ideas that would deliver a sense of what it meant to be human, but in a small scale, not grand opera tragedy or anything like that. Nonetheless, it's serious and it's subtle, and it does give you an arc of of probably what every single one of us goes through at some point in our life, of saying, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do something different. Okay, I met somebody, maybe my different thing is going to take a hiatus. I'm going to stay here for a while. I'm going to be with this person. Then some sort of thing happens, whether it's an actual relationship or not, and then that falls apart, and you either stop being able to go on or move on to the next thing. It's a real trajectory, which I love. I love the fact that these poems can still be completely relevant to our existence.
If, say, someone's hearing this for the first time, what would you like them to get out of this? What would you like them to experience by hearing this?
Ideally, I would like for them to say, wow, people in the 1820s felt exactly the same way that people do now. People go through the exact same life feeling, life hopes, life tragedies, life experiences. People sense love and the ecstasy of that, and the disappointment and the breakup of that love. People are people, and I can experience that through Müller. I can experience that through Schubert. I can experience that through the string quartet and the singer's performance of that. I can feel them feeling that life, that being.
I know we've thrown around some musical terms tonight, but there's also an immediacy of the Müller poetry as well as the music that you don't need to be a trained musician or to get inside this drama. And there is an immediacy to the music and the poetry, which I think is amazing.
Well, I'm thinking of the same things Frank just said, but I also want to point out it's not just these profound emotions that are being expressed. There's a lot of things like pettiness in the lyrics. Pettiness at dumb things like the guy loves the color green and then hates the color green afterwards, like 2 songs later. And the song is just about how much he hates the color green because the hunter came in and was wearing it and whatever. There are these kinds of emotions that every teenager knows, every adult still knows, and if not, it remembers and probably still knows. So there's these profound emotions of love and deep sorrow and deep feeling, and then there are these other very strong surface emotions that are also throughout this. So it's a fun ride. Well, fun isn't the word necessarily, but it's a rewarding ride, even if you're not getting too deep into it.
Yeah, the mercurial of a young man inner life is on full display in this, and of a young person, and it's just yeah, and the poetry, it's a really a perfect marriage.
Yeah, there is even some contemporary, like, I'm going to call this person. Oh no, I have to hang up. I'm gonna try and dial her. No, I'm gonna hang up. Like in song number 8, where he's standing outside her window and wondering, should he like approach? Should he talk to her? Like why won't you talk to me? Like oh, I'll just stand here and I'll just watch your window. Yeah, it's so teenagery. It's so completely like it is.
It's like the 18th century version of like, should I hit her up in a direct
Exactly.
message?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Should I text her now or should
Should I
I?
text her? Yeah.